What is up, everybody, and welcome to day 3 of my social media book tour for My Life in a Nutshell, which is a story about my life. So to talk a little bit about this book, I started writing the idea for a story about my life. Was really going to be just a story about my time as a preschool teacher and a little bit about my dad. The idea of doing a story, the idea of wanting to do a story about my life, it's been something I've always had an idea of wanting to do since I started writing as a kid. Since I started writing stories as a kid, in the back of my mind, I always thought I would love to try and write a story about my life. But as a kid, even as a kid, I knew that I couldn't write a story about my life until I did a lot more living. Excuse me. So when I got into 2019, it was February of 2019, and it had been a little over a month since my father had passed away, and I'm sitting outside in front of a school that was about to close. In 2019, I was a preschool teacher. In 2019, I was a preschool teacher, and the school I was working for at the time was closing. Um, and I'm sitting out front waiting for parents to come so I could get their kids things if there's anything they needed to get. The parents couldn't go into the school because because of it was discovered there was mold in the school, and the company that owned the school looked at it as it being too expensive to knock the walls down and clean up all the mold. Um, they looked at it as it being too expensive, so they just decided to close the school down instead. And we couldn't let parents into the school to get their kids things because of that. So we teachers had to go in the school for them to get their stuff. So that's what we did. And I'm sitting outside, and while I'm doing that, the idea of wanting to write a story um, was mostly just about my time as a preschool teacher so far, and about my dad. And it was really mostly going to be focused on writing about my father, just getting everything that I was feeling about his death and talk about what I knew of his life. That was going to be the main focus of that book, and it was going to be called Preschool and Life. And I know it's a dumb name. It's a dumb name. But as I started writing, I first wrote what I did about my father in preschool, but I didn't stop there. I just kept writing about I kept writing stuff about my life, and I felt and it started just to flow out, and it felt good getting all this stuff out. And went I kind of went back and forth with it. Like sometimes I would write stuff about my life, and sometimes I wouldn't. I kind of just go back and forth with it because it was hard at first to write all about a lot of stuff that I had been trying for most of my life to keep buried and didn't want to talk about and didn't want to relive. And that kind of changed after I went to therapy. And once I went into therapy in 2001, when I went into therapy, that changed, and I felt more comfortable writing about a lot of this stuff that I've been burying deep within me since I was a kid. And then writing a story about my life really felt good. It really felt necessary for me to write this book, to let everything out and to be as personal as I can, and of changing the name into what it is now. But overall, it felt really good to write this book. And starting from something that was going to be this very small thing that I was going to write in 2019 about my time as a preschool teacher and about my father became a story about my life and the things I love and the people I care about and the people that have come and gone from my life. Um, when you read this book, and you learn that this is a story about me, but it's a story about this kid who was treated a certain way, by both sides of a family, on his mother's side and on his father's side, of the product of what he is. My mother is Caucasian, white, and my dad was African American, black, and I am biracial, of being both black and white, and two sides of a family looking at hating what my parents became and who they are and who they were, and who I am, what the product was of that, me. And all that hate was directed toward me, and that affects a kid at a very young age, especially when that kid is very scared to tell his parents about things that he heard, because he's scared of what would happen if he said anything. And that's something a kid couldn't handle. At least I couldn't handle as a kid. So that became the foundation of what started me holding things back, to protect feelings from either getting hurt or from things escalating even further out of control than so yeah. It's a story about how holding all of that in, holding so much in as a kid, and then when his father dies, it blows up like a volcano, and things happen to him mentally, and he almost does things to him physically, that he finally listens to not only himself but the people around him to get help. And when he finally gets help, he realizes what he's gone through it makes sense of what his therapist calls it, and then he's able to in a sense let it go, but not fully. Still learning to work through it and deal with it. And it's a story about love. It's a story about love, family, loss. I talk about my love for pro wrestling and how it saved my life a couple of times, and how it's the constant in my life. I talk about music and my definition of what music is to me. I talk about my father. I talk about his life and his death and how that affected me and still affects me. I talk about my mother and how she's a fighter and how she's doing in her life. I get very personal in this book, and I'm proud of every book that I've ever written, and that is available, and every book that is available now on BarnesandNoble.com and on Amazon. But this book right here, I am very proud of. It is the most personal I have ever been with anyone that will read this book. And if you haven't read it yet, I hope you do. It's available on Amazon and on BarnesandNoble.com. There's a link in the bio for it, and I hope you enjoy it, and I feel like you will not only learn a lot about me, but I feel like you will take something away from this book. I feel like everyone who will read this book and who has read this book will or have taken something away from this book. And I hope one of the things that is taken away is that it's okay not to be okay, and that it's always okay to ask for help. It's always okay to say you need help. And it's also important to tell the ones you love them while we are here. Um, so the chapter that I want to read to you, a bit from the chapter is what I want to read from you is from chapter 15, and it's called "It's Okay Not to Be Okay." And really, this chapter in particular, is just really about my time in therapy, and how I felt about it in the beginning when I first started going, and how scared I was, and how I was ready to leave the doctor, how I was ready to leave the office before the therapist would even come out. And I talk about, in this same chapter, I talk about while I'm in therapy, I take a trip to New York. It was really my first vacation that I've taken by myself um, in a long time, but it was the first time I've taken a vacation trip, just in general, since 2006. And coming back from New York, and how that made me feel, and how much better it made me feel after taking that trip to New York. And where I'm going to start is after sitting in the therapist's office and she's telling me and after going through everything that I have gone through in my life, and she comes up and she tells me that everything that I've gone through with my life is trauma. And at first, I didn't believe that. I didn't think calling what I had was trauma. I believed that trauma was more or less suited for people who have gone through something that more serious than what I've gone through. Hearing her say that what I had trauma, based on everything I talked about, I didn't, even at that time, even going through everything that I was going through and telling her everything that I was going through, I didn't feel like what I was going through was serious enough to be called trauma. That I felt trauma was for someone who's gone through something like a car accident, or for soldiers who are coming back from war and they've seen some really horrible things. I didn't see it as what I had was trauma. Um, and that's where I'm gonna start from, and then go from there. When she described my experiences as trauma, I had a hard time believing that. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't feel like what I had was trauma. A few days later, I was watching TV and Ellen was interviewing a woman. And in the interview, the woman said that everyone goes through their own version of trauma. I heard those words and I listened to the rest of the interview. And what she was saying was making sense to me. I thought about what my therapist said to me. I started thinking about everything I talked to my therapist about. And that's when it hit me. That's when I was able to answer the question I asked myself in chapter 1. What was the source that was driving my unhappiness, my stress, my anxiety, my depression? The answer became clear to me. I was able to connect the dots between what I heard in the interview on The Ellen Show and what my therapist said to me. The way I felt from my childhood to adulthood, remembering what I was feeling in each of those moments, and the feeling brought me to tears. Feeling what it was like to be the black sheep. The racist names I have been called over the years. I was feeling it all over again. And that's when I knew that what my therapist said was right. That the answer to what was the source driving the emotions I was feeling, it was trauma. What I went through as a young child was trauma. And what I had been doing for decades was hiding that trauma. I had to say it out loud so that I had to say it out loud so that it was out there in the world, and that I knew it was real. And that's when I was able to let it go. And when I let it go, that's when the feeling I got from being in New York walking around Central Park, it wasn't just a feeling of happiness. I was feeling better. I was no longer on the landing of steps. I was now climbing those steps and getting closer to the light. It was the first time in a long time that I truly felt more of myself than I've it was the first time it was the first time in a long time that I truly felt more of myself than I felt in a long time. And it was also in that moment when I could finally say that sometimes it's okay not to be okay. Um, My Life in a Nutshell. It's available now, barnesandnoble.com and on Amazon. And thank you. Thank you for joining me for day 3 of my social media book tour right here on my AKT Publishing channel here on YouTube. I appreciate all you for watching. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Hit that like button. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you haven't yet. Keep up to date when I have all new videos like AKT Wrestling. And when I bring back a new season of Storytime with the Anthony KT. Link is in the bio for My Life in a Nutshell, as well as all my other books that are out now on barnesandnoble.com and on Amazon. And that'll do it for day 3 of my social media book tour for My Life in a Nutshell. And I'm Anthony K. Thomas. Thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace, y'all.